Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and yes, I'm an old goth. You know that. But my status as one of the shadow people shambling through the 2020s is strangely relevant to this podcast. In what is now becoming a weekly conversation, how fabulous is this? It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Priscilla Dunk-West. In our conversation last week, Priscilla used the phrase toxic positivity. Now, I love that phrase. It's opened up my old goth heart. But there is a fascinating interdisciplinary literature around that phrase, from social work, from death studies, from grief studies, work studies, and theories of organisational culture, to just name a few areas. So whenever anyone says to you, to me, to us, it's for the best, they've gone to a better place. It's all gonna be great. Yep, that's toxic positivity. Toxic positivity masks and displaces emotion, feeling, despair, righteous sadness at the state of the world. So let's talk with Priscilla and consider the nature of toxic positivity and its role in inhibiting life, inhibiting emotions, inhibiting fear, despair, and grief. Oh, Priscilla, I am so excited about this topic. And look, for a lot of reasons. You're the one that gave me the great phrase, toxic positivity, and I've sort of been obsessed about, will I get a tattoo on my body? I don't have a tattoo, but do I get it as a tattoo? Do I tattoo it on my forehead? And look, it's such an important phrase for our very difficult time. Now, from a social work perspective, how is toxic positivity defined, and what's the consequences of that behaviour in troubling times like the planet's in at the moment?
Well, I'm a social worker, but I'm also, my PhD's in sociology. I'm a sociologist as well, so I sit across those two things. But you also get other professions in social work. So you get psychologists, for example, who are psychologists and social workers, or who have a background training in psychology. But one of the things that social work does well is the individual and society, and understanding both of those, perhaps sometimes in tension with each other. And so for me, the term toxic positivity means kind of just wanting to be joyfully happy, which is not a problem, but in the face of structural or social conditions that aren't so favourable. So for me, the toxic positivity is around the assumption that you can think yourself out of some of the ill effects of social inequality. Does that make sense?
This is changing my life already, because I've done research for you, but can I say what you've just described there is the best definition I've heard. So this is great. So like someone gets a tragic stage 4 cancer diagnosis, and if they can just think positively, then the cancer will go away. Right. So we all love these people. And look, I'm doing a lot of work on the dreadful discourses around mindset. And the mindset people freak me out a little bit. I'm thinking there's some sort of relationship between toxic positivity and the positive mindset. So if we can all just have a positive mindset, we can improve our lives. Now, again, what's your view on mindset as a trope? Because it seems like every second blog in the 2020s, and LinkedIn's filled with the sort of growth mindset stuff. Am I missing something? Should I be as worried as I am about mindset?
Yes, you should be as worried, and no, there's nothing wrong with you. I think when you understand the social conditions that lead to individual experiences, when you understand the impact of those things, when you understand, as you do as a capitalism kind of scholar, when you understand those forces, you can't unsee it, and you can't think yourself out of it. So like housing at the moment is a massive issue in Australia at the moment, and actually globally, but in Australia in particular. And so understanding that the system is working as it's intended that housing is not a human right in this country. It's seen as an investment option. Housing is seen as something that you can make money from. People have multiple properties. They make money from being landlords. And so the system works when there is that inequality. There's people at the top making loads of money and then people trying to find a home to live in and amongst increasing rents. Now, if we applied that toxic positivity to that, we would, we might say, well, stop buying yourself so many lattes or avocado toast or whatever it is, which individualises the social problem of housing, and so or housing inequality. And so I think that's a really tangible example of that. But also I think perhaps this is hand in hand with the rise of social media, but this idea that you can just work on yourself as a project, as Giddens would say, that you can work on yourself and think differently about something and approach something else. That idea of your capacity for mobility through class, for example, or through life to get to somewhere else. So if I'm, experiencing poverty, I might be told, if you just work really hard, you'll get the thing that you are aiming for. That whole attitude serves the system. It serves to keep the system as it is, because it doesn't have people taking to the streets or protesting or gathering together. It individualises the problem and makes it seem as though people have agency or control over things that actually they don't.
They have no control over. And of course that comes from Samuel Smiles' self-help in the 19th century, where of course, focusing on working class men improving themselves so that they wouldn't revolt, so there wouldn't be a revolution. And of course we've got that crazy rendering of that now with this Mel Robbins nightmare, the let them suffer, because there's nothing you can do to alleviate their suffering, so let them. So this is catastrophic, really. And therefore that leads me to my next question, and I'm a bit obsessed about this one too. Painful emotions, so really difficult emotions in response to really tough stuff that we all go through, illness, homelessness, death, abuse, the loss of a house, the loss of a job. And look, having these difficult, complicated emotions, righteous rage or anger or fear in response to these contexts can make the people around us uncomfortable, right? So what's the impact, though, of stuffing down these dreadful situations and emotions on a person's life? So, if, what do the young people call it? Trauma dumping. Like, you're doing a bit of trauma dumping, right? So what's the consequence of not trauma dumping, of masking, burying these emotions for this toxic positivity to keep it all light?
I think there's a couple of things. There's a couple of kind of theories or theorists that I kind of go to in this space, and some of it comes from an anti-psychiatry or madness studies kind of space.
Woo!
And some of it comes from understanding the way that we have individualized but also pathologised emotion. And so we've got the medicalisation of emotion, which has people feeling like a usual human emotion like anxiety can be a clinical problem. And so I remember when the DSM-5 came out, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And I remember when that came out, and one of the criticisms was that there was no normal left, because it covers everything. And so you get this pathologisation of emotion, which is, again, individualises social problems, right? So if I'm awake at night worrying about how I'm going to pay my power bill, is there something wrong with me because I'm not thinking, I'm not being positive about it, but also what's wrong with me and my body that I'm having this anxiety? What's the problem? And so when you think about what is the problem, well, the problem is actually the effects of poverty.
Yes.
Right? It's not there's not anything wrong with me for being anxious about that. And I think some of these critiques have come up through, feminist analyses of the mental health system and the over-pathologisation of women in, thinking about anger, for example. Anger's, often pathologised as bad for women. And so I think that all of these expressions of emotion or avoidance of emotion or the stuffing down of emotion have to exist alongside some of those theoretical spaces that help us make sense of it, but also critique the idea. And this is, we live in an age, I think, post-Freud, where we think that the talking therapies are going to help us with everything. We have to talk about everything, and we've got to work through, and we've got to. Actually, sometimes we don't. Sometimes people find ways to deal with some really awful stuff that's happened to them that don't involve therapy. And so I am a bit critiquey of therapy culture. So they're the theoretical spaces that I go to when I think about the way that emotion has been pathologized, individualized, but also silenced if you're thinking about that toxic positivity, because it's like only happy thoughts, only good thoughts, only think good things, and make sure that your mind is open for growth and those sorts of things. And what that does effectively is shuts down any critique of broader systems and structures and social conditions that look less than favourable.
Yeah, and it also, where I come into this story is it really then pathologises grief as well. Someone who does a lot of work in death studies as an old goth, we have this normative parameter of what grief looks like. Well, when a spouse dies, your entire life has been destroyed. The version of your life has also died. So putting normative parameters around that, just is not possible. And again, pathologising grief and pathologising the response to death, again, terribly, terribly problematic, I think. But you've already mentioned social media, and I do want to go there because my great fear, and I would align this with some areas of social media, is that we're losing the capacity to see, to feel and experience authentic emotion. So everything, metaphorically or perhaps not, has a filter. So can this toxic positivity block our capacity to read, to be literate in more deeper or intricate emotional states?
Yeah, I think social media, and you and I have spoken about speed, but it does speed things up as well, right? So the reels, the short kind of form of expression is, just gets across kind of lots of little facts. It's fast and people kind of scroll and flick through. And so we have this, you can't get depth when you're covering that. You don't get those depths of emotion, of different emotional states. I think the other thing is that it's not human to human interaction, right? It's interaction through a different interface, and so you get a kind of blunting perhaps of that, that experience of really being with somebody and feeling something, and acknowledging emotion. And emotion is something that, sometimes it's about understanding it not through language, right? So that's the other thing that social media does, is it has us relying on particular forms of communication that doesn't capture the messiness or the nuance or the indescribable, right? It doesn't let us do that. Whereas something like, art, going and creating art or visual art or experiencing visual art, where you might not have the words, but you've got the feelings and you've got the understanding of the messy.
And the tactility of it as well.
Yes.
So what you've captured there is really the challenge of a screen being a prophylactic. It's blocking you. It's putting a barrier to understanding the multi-literate, the multimodal ways of thinking about emotion. Amazing.
Yes.
Now, last question, which of course is linked with that, and I didn't know it would link to that, so this is amazing. Now, I'm a member of a great organisation. They're a bunch of hippies, but they're sort of cool hippies. There's an old goth. They're hippies, but they're good hippies. And this group's called the Global Listening Centre, and it is about as intense as it sounds. But what they're trying to do is understand auditory culture and sounds and how they're undercooked in a visual age. But do you think that listening and listening cultures can transform that toxic positivity and return some sort of authenticity back to workplaces, to homes, to media environments? What role can listening and sonic literacies do to change this culture, do you think?
So listening as hearing other people's experience and hearing other people's stories.
In context, yeah.
I think listening has to occur alongside thinking, and I think, there should be a thinking centre.
Wow.
How about that? One of my great colleagues, Fiona Verity, and I wrote a couple of books on sociological social work, and she used to talk about one of her hobbies is thinking. And I remember thinking, wow, what a great thing, just sitting and thinking. We don't really think about thinking so much anymore, do we? So I think this listening has to go alongside thinking, and the thinking has to go alongside making sense of what I said at the beginning about, the tension between the individual and society. How much thinking about what degree do we as individuals have? What choices do we have in a society that prescribes particular forms of behaviour or expectations of us? And so the thinking has to go alongside perhaps a sociological imagination, but also those critical thinking skills, which actually, interestingly, critical thinking is emerging as a real area of need for people in the age of artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
And so this idea of critical thinking, I think, has to sit alongside analyses of power. So that housing example that I gave before, thinking about power, thinking about who benefits and who suffers from this current system, and thinking about things in their social and historical and cultural context. So, yes, thinking, but also listening, and that those two things maybe go hand in hand.
Oh, that's huge. And as you've rightly said, and what a place to finish, Priscilla, when we're talking about so much attention on artificial intelligence at the moment, how about we get rid of the adjective and just focus a little bit on intelligence, and again, how we gain these diverse literacies to enable ourselves to not have simple answers to questions no one's asking, which I think is what toxic positivity is, but really caring for other humans, having that caring infrastructure, which perhaps starts with emotion, but emotion can then be anchored or linked to that thinking culture you're talking about.
And listening goes with respect. It goes with respect for your fellow human. It goes with actually kind of putting yourself back a little bit and, listening to somebody else's perspective that might be very different from your own. So, kind of sitting back from, putting yourself away for a minute to kind of really listen to somebody's life experience.
Well, can I say I have loved listening to your life experience and your incredible expertise this week, as always. And big hello to everybody who's offering us incredible feedback every week. We are loving this conversation, and we're loving engaging with you as well. So, Priscilla, thank you, my love.
Thank you.